nominations for the post of party leader closed at 4 p.m. today, with only two candidates being Nick Clegg and Chris Huhne. Speculation as to either man's chances will intensify from now until the victor is announced on December 17th. Now, many eyes will be fixed upon the odds offered by bookmakers. Political betting is not the largest arm of the betting industry, but it is a growing one. However, its current small size would make it relatively easy for a wealthy bettor to distort the odds by laying down a large bet. Our guest Olly Kendall has written an article highlighting the concern that a market so vulnerable to distortion nevertheless has an impact on the outcome of political votes. So is it time for regulation to be introduced to nip this problem in the bud? So Olly, tell us what inspired you to write your article and what your conclusions were.
Okay, well, just to caveat everything I say, I'm not pointing a single finger at any candidate, any party, any individual.
He says
whatever.
that now.
Okay, I think it is an important point, and it has been one that's been rehashed over the last sort of 5, 10, 15 years. But with the sort of with the growth of the betting market, and particularly it's easy to do online nowadays, I think there is a case to be answered by the political parties as to when it is appropriate for politicians to wager political bets. And I use the sort of Lib Dem case as an example. And if you look at the moment between Clegg and Huhne, Clegg is the obvious favourite, Huhne is sort of 2 or 3 to 1 at the moment. But the money that goes on the political markets for the Lib Dem leadership is relatively small. It's about 100 grand at the moment that's been bet. It's not exciting the interest of punters and voters at all. And it would be relatively easy, and there are no rules at the moment governing this that say you can't do it, for a candidate, a member of the candidate's team, a wealthy benefactor or friend, to put lots of money on the candidate and get the odds down. Now, without wishing to insult voters, because clearly voters will, I hope Lib Dem voters will base their judgment on how good a candidate is, what his policies are, how charismatic he is, so on and so forth. But it will affect and it will impact the way that the media report the election, because if Chris Huhne is the rank outsider, then everyone is talking up Nick Clegg, everyone is interested in Nick, and nobody's really interested in who the other guy is. But if, for example, a candidate were to go on a show and they were the second candidate in the 2-horse race, and they were to do quite well, and the candidate's supporters were to orchestrate a sort of lots of bets on that particular candidate and then sustain those bets to keep that money down, then you would suddenly have momentum, you'd have the press talking about the issue, and you will then kind of generate more and more press coverage, which is completely orchestrated by the candidate and has no bearing whatsoever on the genuine performance of the candidate. So I think there is an issue to be answered, and I made the point in the article tomorrow that there are sort of codes of practice across various areas of life. There's a sports betting code of practice that was introduced about this time last year, which ensures that there is no impropriety within the sports betting markets. And I don't think it would be that difficult for political parties to introduce a sort of a code of conduct which says that if you are standing, I mean, you can limit it to political parties in terms of internal elections like leadership, or you could possibly widen it to parliamentary elections as well. But if you are standing for a position, you will not, and none of your team will knowingly wager a bet on yourself. Because let's face it, when you're a political writer, you base your judgment on who the favourites are based on the chats you have with people in Westminster, which peers are backing, the particular candidate, your intrinsic knowledge of the political landscape, but also what the odds are. So I think it's, it impacts in other areas that greyhound racing wouldn't do.
Now, I think I read somewhere that the amount of money that could skew this is as little as something like £1,300. It's a relatively small amount of money that could actually start to alter the odds.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking on Betfair and I quoted those figures. If that was about 24 hours ago now. If you looked on Betfair, in theory, Chris Huhne could, if he wanted to, or a supporter, whatever, could wager about £1,300, get the odds down to the same as Nick Clegg. Now, of course, it would require sustained betting, and this is the important bit, and probably a lot more money to keep those odds there. And I guess if you were particularly cynical, you would do that exercise after a sort of a question time debate or some televised debate where the candidate may have been considered to have done particularly well, and therefore it would almost justify that reduction in the odds. So yes, it is possible, and of course Betfair, the market there is maybe slightly smaller, I think, than perhaps Ladbrokes or William Hill. But if you had deep pockets, you could do it. And it kind of comes back in a way to the thing we were talking about earlier on about donations to political parties. Do you want people who have got deep pockets to be able to impact the direction of political parties, whether it's the policies of the parties, whether it's getting peerages, whether it's deciding or determining the fate of the leadership election? And I think the answer to that categorically is no.
David, does it look like there's some loopholes that need closing around this issue?
No, the answer to everything is not legislation. It's just ridiculous. The voters, I tend to think, are probably slightly more sensible than they're being given credit for. And if the political writers can't work out that, you know, a bet's being skewed or it's not quite the right answer, I'm sure the voters can, even Liberal Democrat members could sort that out, I imagine. So no, I don't. The answer is never rarely legislation, shall we say? Not never, but rarely legislation, and certainly not as something as insignificant as this. What is the point?
Peter, do you think the media, that if perhaps if people aren't going to be skewed by how the bets go and the odds, but do you think the media will follow the odds a little to who they give more coverage to?
Yeah, I mean, the media will always report a story if there is a story, and certainly, I mean, I think what Olly's done is highlighted the fact that there's a possibility of a small amount of money shifting the odds. However, what we're talking about in the first instance here is the intelligence of the members of the Liberal Democrat Party and the readiness with which they might be swayed as to whom they're going to vote for, who's going to hopefully, from their point of view, lead their party to better fortunes in the next election than looked to be the case under Sir Mingus Campbell. So I think that it's in the greater scheme of things, it is a very minor issue. I think that there is a very big subject concerning the clean-up of British politics, which we haven't really dipped into at all.
I think